"That patch looks like something you picked up at a surplus store. Old-timer, are you lost?" The voice was sharp and dripping with the arrogant confidence of a 20-something, in peak physical condition wielding authority. Lieutenant Kyle Peterson stood in the old man's way, arms crossed, his crisp Navy working uniform practically vibrating with self-importance. He was all sculpted muscle and regulation, jaw tight, eyes sweeping over the elderly visitor with undisguised contempt. They were inside the sterile, high-tech briefing room of a naval special warfare training facility, a place where legends were made and weakness was surgically removed. And by every outward measure, the old man seemed the very image of weakness. He wore a faded flannel shirt beneath a worn dark blue windbreaker, clean jeans frayed at the cuffs, and his hands, resting calmly at his sides, were gnarled with age, his skin a roadmap of a long, hard life. What drew Peterson's scorn, though, was the patch on the jacket, a simple black circle with a crudely embroidered skeletal frog clutching a trident. Not standard issue and nothing seen on any active-duty uniform. Looking to Peterson like a cheap knockoff, a pathetic civilian attempt at cosplaying heroism. The old man didn't flinch. His pale, clear blue eyes, strangely out of place in his weathered face, met the lieutenant's stare without fear or anger, steady and patient like ancient stones beneath a river. "I was told to wait here," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to cost him effort, adding as he gestured slightly toward the patch, "This was given to me." A few other young SEALs in the background, cut from the same granite as their officer, chuckled quietly, seeing what Peterson saw, a confused grandpa who had wandered past multiple layers of security and embarrassment. "Given to you? By who? The flea market vendor?" Peterson scoffed as he stepped closer, trying to intimidate him with sheer physical presence. A tactic that worked on recruits and anyone who respected the hierarchy. But the old man didn't move, remaining a frail island of calm amid youthful aggression. "You need to tell me who you are and how you got on this base, or I'm having you escorted to the brig now." The threat hanging in the chilled air as the old man's gaze drifted past Peterson to a large framed photograph on the wall showing a Vietnam-era team. Faces smeared with camo, gear primitive by today's standards. His expression stayed the same, yet something stirred deep in those blue eyes, a flicker of a long-banked fire. "It's been a long time," he murmured more to himself than to the indignant officer. The gate has changed, and Peterson's famously shallow patience evaporated as he snapped that he didn't care about the gate. Only about an unauthorized civilian standing in a classified briefing room. Last chance, Pop's name and purpose. He jabbed a finger toward the old man's chest, his voice rising with a volume meant to command and demean, while the other SEALs shifted, their amusement sharpening into anticipation of a confrontation. One of them, a young petty officer named Davis, felt a knot tighten in his stomach as he watched the old man's hands. They weren't shaking, but perfectly still, resting with a calm, economical control he had seen only once before, in the Master Chief who taught them hand-to-hand combat. A man who could explode into terrifying speed from total relaxation. There was something else too, the patch, something Davis had seen long ago in a dusty corner of the base library, in an old leather-bound book about the program's history. An image he couldn't quite place, but which sparked a warning in his mind. "Sir," Davis said, stepping forward hesitantly, "maybe we should call base command." "But stay out of this, Davis," Peterson snapped without taking his eyes off the old man. "I'm handling it." Turning back to the intruder, he said, "All right, that's it. You've had your chance," and reached out, grabbing the old man's arm, his fingers clamping down on the thin jacket and the frail-looking bicep beneath, intending to march him out himself. It was the touch that did it, not the pressure, which was nothing but the intent behind it, the sudden, unearned authority as the bright, sterile briefing room dissolved. The smell of disinfectant and floor wax replaced by blood and swamp water. the hum of ventilation becoming the drone of a distant PBR boat on the Mekong Delta. The lieutenant's hard face blurred into the terrified eyes of a young soldier. A boy from Alabama named Charlie, who had grabbed his arm the same way 60 years earlier. The thought, "Don't leave me," Jed echoing not as a memory, but as a living ghost. He was no longer Yedodia Croft, an 87-year-old man in a briefing room, but Jed, 27. Lying in the mud with Charlie's dying weight pinning him down as cold rain fell in sheets. The jungle alive with insects and distant AK-47 fire. His team gone and Charlie bleeding out from a gut wound, whispering that they were coming back and Jed had to go. Charlie's grip was desperately strong, an anchor fading with each shallow breath. And Jed had a choice to stay and die or leave and finish the mission. Retrieve the intelligence from the downed pilot before the Viet did, and with a surge of guilt that would haunt his nights for the rest of his life, he pried Charlie's fingers from his arm, whispering, "I'll come back for you," a lie they both knew. As Charlie rasped, "Godspeed, Frogman," with a bloody smile. The memory so vivid that when the briefing room snapped back into focus, Yedodia's hand instinctively covered the spot on his arm where Charlie had held him. His breath was steady, but his pale blue eyes had hardened into something like diamonds, reflecting a depth of sorrow and violence the young lieutenant could never comprehend. And Peterson felt the shift immediately. The old man hadn't moved, yet the air around him had changed. The frail, confused senior citizen replaced by something ancient and dangerous, making Peterson's grip on his arm suddenly feel foolish, like a child clutching the tail of a sleeping tiger. And he let go, retreating a half step without meaning to. "What's the matter with you?" Peterson demanded, his voice noticeably less certain now, unnerved by the sudden transformation, as a heavy silence settled over the room, broken only by the quiet hum of electronics. The other SEALs no longer laughing but watching intently, sensing this was far beyond a simple security breach. Petty Officer Davis, his instincts now screaming, discreetly pulled out his phone and typed an urgent message to the Command Master Chief's aide, "Sir. Unknown elderly civilian in briefing room 3. P. Peterson is confronting him. Situation is unusual. Man wearing non-reg patch, black circle skeletal frog. Request guidance," sending it as his thumb hovered over the screen. The old man Yedodia finally lowered his hand and looked at Peterson, and for the first time there was something other than patience in his eyes, not anger, but a deep, profound pity. "You wear that trident on your chest," Yedodia said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "You think you know what it means, think it's about strength, about being harder than anyone else," and he paused, his gaze sweeping over the young, powerful men in the room. "That's part of it, the smallest part." Before Peterson could muster an arrogant reply, the briefing room door flew open with a force that made everyone jump. Captain Marcus Cole, the base commander, stood in the doorway, a tall, imposing man in his late 50s with a chest full of ribbons and a reputation as hard as a submarine hull. Yet his normally authoritative face was pale, his eyes wide and fixed on the old man in the flannel shirt. And he ignored Peterson and the others completely as he entered with reverence, his polished boots silent on the tile. "I can't believe it," Cole breathed, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. "We were told you were coming, but I didn't think." "Sir," stopping a few feet from Yedodia and snapping a salute so sharp it was a work of art, a gesture of profound respect reserved for a living legend. Leaving Peterson and his men staring in disbelief at a captain saluting a civilian in a worn jacket. "At ease," Captain Yedodia said softly, a weary smile touching his lips. "It's just Jed now." And Cole slowly lowered his hand, posture still rigid, eyes filled with awe. "Sir, my apologies for the reception you received," Cole said. "I was in a meeting across the base. My aide just got the message," his gaze flickering for a nanosecond toward Peterson with a look that promised a career-ending conversation. before turning back to Yedodia. "I haven't seen one of those in the wild in 30 years, he added reverently, pointing to the skeletal frog patch. "Not since the Admiral showed me his," as Lieutenant Peterson finally found his voice again, now stripped of arrogance and filled with confusion, asking, "Captain, what is that? What's going on?" Captain Cole slowly turned his head, fixing Peterson with a glare sharp enough to peel paint. "What's going on, Lieutenant?" he began, his voice dangerously low. "You are standing in the presence of the man who wrote the book you pretend to have read. You are in the presence of a ghost, a founding father." He gestured to the patch. "That is not a souvenir. That is the original unit insignia of the Pacific Fleet's underwater demolition teams, predating the official formation of the SEALs. It was hand-stitched by the wives, and that specific design, the skeletal frog, belonged to a special 5-man detachment that operated so far off the books most records were burned in the 70s. They were called the night tadpoles, sent to do the things no one else could or would do." The other SEALs exchanged stunned looks, having heard only hushed rumors of the nearly mythical teams that forged their legacy in Southeast Asia and frozen northern waters, never imagining one stood before them. "This man," Cole continued, his voice rising with passion, "is Jedediah Croft. He served in 3 wars, though you'll only find records for one. He earned the Navy Cross at Incheon and another, awarded in secret, for a mission in the Mekong Delta where he was the sole survivor, securing vital intelligence while wounded and evading capture for 9 days. Peterson's face drained of color as he stared at the old man's gnarled hands and simple clothes, unable to reconcile them with the warrior being described. "And that's not all," Cole said, his gaze locking onto Jedediah with near reverence. "There was another mission, still classified at the highest levels, a hostage rescue deemed impossible by the Pentagon. They had written off the hostages. This man and his team went in anyway, and what they did that night redefined special operations for the next 50 years. He took a breath. For that, President Johnson personally awarded him the Medal of Honor in a closed ceremony. The citation is sealed and will likely remain sealed forever." A collective gasp filled the room as the weight of that revelation settled, thick with shame, and Peterson felt the floor drop out beneath him, every mocking word replaying like a blade as his pride crumbled before the quiet dignity of the man he had insulted. Cole then turned to Jedediah and gently asked if he would do him an honor, explaining that his men often saw only rank and uniform, not the history behind them, gesturing toward the old man's head. Jedediah seemed to understand and slowly remove his faded blue cap, the lights revealing thin white hair and old scars. One jagged silver line at his temple, instantly recognizable from the single grainy declassified photo in the archives. The final piece confirming the legend was real. Peterson's legs gave way as he stepped forward and dropped to one knee, head bowed, choking out an apology, followed by the others kneeling in spontaneous reverence, as the elite briefing room became a place of humility. Jedediah looked down at them, remembering his own youth and hard-earned lessons, and placed a gentle hand on Peterson's shoulder, telling him to get up. That everyone makes mistakes, but the strong learn from them. That uniforms and tridents don't make a man, character does, shown by how one treats those thought to have nothing to offer. Peterson rose with his men, shaken and resolute, promising never to forget. As it was revealed, Jedediah had been invited as an anonymous plank owner to speak to new trainees, though the most important lesson had already been learned. They had learned humility, that heroes don't always wear uniforms, that the most dangerous men often have nothing left to prove, and that history is living and breathing. As Jedediah left with Captain Cole, he paused to give Peterson a small nod of forgiveness and understanding. A quiet passing of the torch, and the encounter became a whispered legend on the base, told not to shame but to teach the truth that real strength is quiet confidence. forged in unseen fires, a reminder to look deeper. Honor those who came before, and recognize the hidden heroes who walk among us, whose stories and sacrifices form the legacy on which future generations stand.